The cube is back in Fortnite, but this time it's different. So I investigated why it's here and found the timeline showing what happens next and its plan to rewrite Fortnite history. Today, I'll explain everything from the very beginning. You see, most people don't know the real story. They think they do, and they would be right to say it started when the sky was split into two and left behind a gigantic rift. A couple of weeks later, the lightning emanating from this rift would eventually strike next to Paradise Palms in the middle of a Fortnite tournament.
What just happened?
People kept trying to understand what on earth this gigantic cube was doing on the map. They were so confused that the mods of the subreddit had to ban the word cube just to stop the spam, so the fans got creative and nicknamed it Kevin just to get around the filters. The name stuck, and we'd watch him week in and week out rolling around the island, stamping down these strange symbols. Entire websites and fan forums went online tracking every movement, and they calculated that his final destination was Loot Lake. But we didn't hear much from the cube after this. It was now melted into a POI, but looking back, the next season would have dire implications for where we are now in 2025. So Darkness Rises saw Kevin emerge from the lake carrying the entire POI with him and floating in the sky. Just like last time, we had to follow his tracks as this new floating island moved around the map constantly, and fans quickly realized that Kevin was going back to all of the runes he had placed a few months before. With each rune that he revisited, Kevin absorbed power from them and became larger. After all 7 runes were absorbed, the next phase would begin. And think where we are in 2025, because this cube event would kickstart Fortnitemares 2018. The floating island had now been cracked into 3 separate pieces, and every so often a portal would appear, striking Kevin and taking his power. With each portal, cube monsters would be summoned from another dimension, swarming the island like zombies. This continued for weeks, and Kevin simply remained at Loot Lake, hovering over some kind of vortex. It seemed like this exact location wasn't random, but something Kevin already knew about. As some of the cracks got bigger and the power became too much, Kevin started leaking energy into the whirlpool below him, dripping faster and faster until there was basically nothing left to give. With all of the energy drained, everyone gathered for what seemed to be Fortnite's next live event. But this would basically kickstart the entire storyline. Now, at the time, this was completely unexplainable. Where did we go? What happened to Kevin? Why was there a rift butterfly? What did all of this mean? All that remained of Kevin were some rocks covering up the place his vortex used to be. Clearly, something was underneath this grass, and he tried to break into it, but we just didn't know what. And for most players, we all assumed it would be the last time we'd see this cube. After all, he felt like more of a side character whose job was complete. But it wasn't. From this very moment, Kevin will begin to make appearances for the next half-decade. A season after the butterfly event, we had moved on to a new villain, the Ice King. He arrived in a floating orb over his castle, also collecting power to prepare for a snowstorm. But take a look at the king in replay mode, and you'd see that he was holding a fractured piece of the cube. More live events would follow throughout Chapter 1, revealing that there was something inside of Loot Lake after all. The very same spot that Kevin exploded was a vault containing this orb we called the 0 Point, and the inside of this place was very similar to where we appeared in the butterfly event. What we gathered from this was that Kevin was sent here to track down the vault and then break it open. So he was now responsible for kickstarting the story, powering the Ice King, breaking open the vault. I mean, this side character was one of the most important beings in Fortnite history. Clearly, there was more to this, and we wouldn't get the next piece of the puzzle until 3 seasons later in the final moments of the Chapter 1 island. Because of all the rift zones bringing back iconic locations from past seasons, this meant that a Kevin from an alternate timeline had returned. This version of the cube hadn't yet completed its explosion of Loot Lake, but something was kind of weird about it. Despite the fact he was moving around the island just like the original, he didn't activate any of these runes, and he was carrying the motel rather than the Loot Lake house. No one knew what this meant, and only figured it out once the final day of the season happened. Just hours before the end brought a black hole to Fortnite, Kevin returned to his original spot. His purpose was to be a timer for the finale of Chapter 1. And so as we stared at the darkness waiting for what came next, we all wondered, would Kevin ever truly return? When we landed onto the Chapter 2 island, we discovered a different kind of mystery. With the entire map redesigned, there was a treasure trove of new POIs to explore, one of which was Steamy Stacks. This ginormous power plant wasn't powered by nuclear energy, no, something much stronger. It was power from the cube. You see, we would eventually learn that all of the material from Chapter 1's island was simply reformed into both Chapter 2 and 3's map, but we didn't know it at the time. This meant that the floating island from Season X had been transformed into a power source for Steamy Stacks, explaining why it now belonged to a company known as Kevolution Energy. This was all that Cube fans would get for the next 2 years. And so as we played the rest of Chapter 2, memories of Kevin were simply that, memories. We would reminisce about his motives, what the butterfly event actually meant, and where he came from, but the answers wouldn't come until 6 seasons later. There was a brand new villain named Raz, and while he was on the island, the center of the map was this place called the Spire. It was a giant tower of stone that was built to encase the 0 point, and it let it heal after the previous events. Raz was on a mission to learn the secrets of the Spire and figure out why it was calling to him. You see, he'd spent his whole life dreaming of visions of the future, and this Spire had been calling to him for pretty much all of that time. Raz analyzed 0 point crystals around this place and heard tales of some kind of artifact relating to the Spire. Well, he finally discovered this relic, but it would corrupt him with strange powers, like totally changing his ambitions and transforming him into the villain of the season. He was now the Glyph Master, and just like the Ice King from years before, if you looked at Raz in replay mode, you would see that the artifact that corrupted him this whole time was a shard of the cube. It was the tiniest detail that ended up being Fortnite's official teaser for what was about to dominate the rest of the chapter, because this corrupted power would bring the last reality and their mothership. So the corruption led the mothership here, and they instantly destroyed the Spire, took over the island, and began a huge war. All of the memories of Kevin the Cube playing a role in this were gone. But then we would see short glimpses of him in concerts and also in side modes that told us his story wasn't over, and it all built up to his re-emergence in Operation Skyfire. So Epic disguised this as an event where we would take down the mothership and bring peace back to the island. Sounded good, right? Well, to defend against our attack, the mothership sent out an enemy that we were already familiar with, Kevin. Except at this point, the Imagined Order had already studied him and just knew how to take him out, and it's where Sloan was able to shut down this cube for good. So why this is important to 2025 is when all the players on the island came together and touched the cube, rebooting it with 0 corruption. It was now cleansed and free of the last reality's control, causing the community to give him a nickname of his own, Blevin. It was our first time with a different colored cube, and the puzzle pieces were starting to connect. But this wasn't even the plot twist that cemented the cubes as the most important characters of the decade. That would actually happen a couple minutes later when we would discover who the last reality actually were. We were so overwhelmed by what we had just seen that no one even noticed the golden cube glowing from the back of the room. Instead, we were witnessing their army falling down towards the island, and it prepared us for one of the craziest season themes yet, Season 8, Cube. Looking back, it's a pretty clever name, considering we thought there were 1 or 2 cubes only for them to have multiplied. And it wasn't just a swarm of corrupted Kevins, these guys were all led by one person, someone who had been pulling the strings from her golden box, the Cube Queen. Around the island, most of the cubes have fallen into the ocean and deactivated, and it showed that they were weak to water. And this explains why Kevin melted into the lake back in Chapter 1, because it was the only way he could get to the vault without dying. This weakness to the ocean will become extremely important soon, but for now, it meant that only 5 cubes remained alive on the map, along with their queen and the survivor of Operation Skyfire, Blevin. 1 week later, the 5 cubes had woken up and started moving, and the golden cube had already moved over 50 different times. This was because the Cube Queen was traveling to places like Believer Beach and powering up the other cubes, using the energy to form babies and multiply the army. As more and more were created, corruption began spreading until a forgotten friend got in on the action. You see, the whole time for the past couple years, Steamy Stacks had remained undamaged damaged throughout all of the seasons, but now the cubes are here, and it awakened the alternate universe Kevin that was brought here in Season X. Breaking free from the power plant, all that was left here was a giant hole in the building and the remains of the Kevolution energy sign saying Kev out. If we followed the tracks, it led us straight to the latest cube on the map, the actual return of Kevin himself for the first time in years. When the Cube Queen eventually found him and tried to create babies, he was different. The process just didn't work, implying that Kevin wasn't a part of the last reality. But why was the Queen making all these tiny cubes in the first place? Well, she needed the numbers for the next stage of her plan, as they all began to converge at the same place on the map. With every cube now coming together to form a brand new POI, the golden cube took its place at the very top of the convergence, revealing that of course the Cube Queen was about to break free from inside. But pay attention, because just like Kevin all those years ago, this was the official build-up to Fortnite Marys.
The time for games is over. Leave nothing behind.
History was officially repeating itself. She was here to unleash an army of monsters from her homeworld, very similar to what Kevin did back in Chapter 1. But these were new and improved creatures from a place known as the Sideways. She was officially overwhelming our fight so that we will be weakened enough in time for the true enemy of the season. You see, with all of the cubes now damaged or busy, she had to use what was left to power up a portal and call for backup. But before that could happen, our main characters had a plan to protect themselves, and we got backup of our own. So with the cube that we were able to get on our side, we could hold off whatever was coming long enough to save the island. 11 was our hope, and now it was time for the portal to open, revealing the full power of the last reality. But sadly, Blevin couldn't handle an entire invasion on his own. So instead, we had to rely on the 7 to reveal that they were on the other side of the island this whole time. They flipped the entire map upside down, and they used the Cube Queen's weakness against her. Last reality had been defeated for now. And so with the portal closed and the army decimated, it was time to turn over a new leaf and explore Chapter 3's many mysteries. With the cubes playing such a gigantic role in every major story event to date, it seemed like we had so many unanswered questions. What was the cradle in the sky? Where was all of this going? Instead of answers, we got even more questions in Chapter 3 at a POI known as the Joneses. Because if you went into one of the buildings and looked at this desk, you would see a small figure of Blevin, remembering his contribution to saving the island. But look closer and you'd spot a selection of 3 dice. A purple cube referencing Kevin, a yellow cube for the Queen, and then a mysterious third one that was red. We had never seen a red cube before. What were they trying to tell us? Then, a few seasons later, it emerged that one of the members of the 7, the Origin, had a very interesting backstory. This whole time, he was actually the Cube King. And after a bombshell like that, for the next 3 years, the Cube, the 7, and the entire story that had led us up to this point vanished. It was now December 2nd, 2023, and Fortnite brought back its most iconic season, the return of OG. Not only were we dropped in the exact same place we remembered from 2018, but we got to look over the horizon and spot Kevin the Cube's floating island exactly where we left it. But this time, something was different. You see, back in the day, this island was on a mission to break into the vault and take the 0 point, but it ran out of energy right before it could succeed and exploded. That didn't happen this time around. Instead, the cube successfully extracted the 0 point, and it was a rare look at what would have happened if Kevin did his job all those years ago. Then, the island and Kevin vanished once again for another 2 years. We all thought it was over, but in 2025, I've realized it's just begun. So as you know, we now have OG as a permanent mode, and for the last 8 months, we have watched as each season has repeated itself, including the live events. This meant that back in July, fans got to reunite and watch the rocket launch all over again. Except there was one major difference. we had officially come full circle. The origins of Kevin were playing out all over again in real time, but the rift that brought him to the island was now bright red. Just like 2018, this rift would now spend the next few weeks expanding and bringing objects from all over the universe to and from OG. We watched as the motel sign appeared in Reload, the Durr Burger showed up in Blitz, and Tomato Head rifted to BR, linking all of the major modes together for the first time in storyline history. The giant rift continued to shrink just like before, slowly gathering its power at the corrupted center. Then suddenly, lightning strikes began once again, this time bright red, wiping out each cactus one at a time like a clock, and then it happened. With this red cube taking Kevin's place, rolling around and following the same path, we start to wonder what else is different. And that's when we realize this time he'd be placing different runes. Instead of the old glyphs we know, these were much more complex, so what do they mean? Well, it's gonna roll around the OG map, effectively rewriting the story in real time, and now we know what happens next. All I'll say is that just like the last two times the cube shocked the world, we are now weeks away from Fortnite mares. The time machine from years ago is coming back, and all of this is leading to the end of this chapter. Ladies and gentlemen, the storyline is officially back.